Sophie, thank you so much for joining me. How are you today?
Good, thank you. I'm delighted to be talking to you today.
So I'm really looking forward to it because this is a topic that's very close to my heart. But before we get into that and get into the meat of this topic, tell me, this is a question I love to ask people. What did you want to be when you were growing up?
This is an interesting one because I actually found myself in my parents' attic the other day, and I found some old schoolwork, and I discovered that at the age of 8, I'd written a story about wanting to be an astronaut, to be on a rocket ship. Interestingly, I'd also written in that story at the age of 8 that I couldn't be an astronaut because girls aren't spacemen. So the interesting aspirations at that age. Mainly though, growing up, I wanted to be an actress, specifically Penelope Keith. Do you remember Penelope Keith?
We all want to be Penelope Keith. I still do.
It's so easy, right? All she did was wander around a manor house, speaking in her own accent. She didn't even need to learn any accent and being funny. Seemed like that was a great job to have.
She had great writing, didn't she, as well?
She is fantastic. What did you want to be when you grew up, Maria?
Oh my goodness, I wanted to be independent, desperately independent, and that's always been my thing. But it's interesting you say astronaut because a lot of my guests have actually said they've wanted to be astronauts. You're the first lady who said, the first female who said it. But I might do a poll and see how many wanted to be astronauts. And the other thing that's interesting, of course, is astronauts are in rocket ships that go fast.
Yes.
So you might end up answering my question with that, really. What first got you interested in fast, in speed?
So I've always been a little bit of an acceleration addict. I've worked inside big organisations, I've been an entrepreneur, I've been an advisor for years, and I just love that thrill of seeing a project take off or a person grow really fast or things happen and be created. It can be incredibly exciting. But a couple of years ago, quite a number of my clients and my friends who were in leadership roles in business were all saying the same thing to me about speed. You know, the excitement about the world in which we live right now, which allows us all to do so many things so fast. It's really intoxicating. It's a great time to be in business from that point of view. But all my friends were saying, there is so much we can do, and we can do it really fast, but my organisation is too slow, or my team is too slow, or I'm too slow. And they were feeling really frustrated about this. And they were all pretty exhausted as well, because that's the other thing. The super fast world in which we live is very high pressure pace setting. And they were just exhausted and wanted to know how they could manage and navigate this super fast world. So that felt like something that was worth investigating.
And do you think it is the super fast world that is driving this need for being fast and for speed? Is that what it is? Or are we creating the super fast world because we are wanting to be fast? Which way around is it?
Well, of course, it's a mix of both. So ambitious people have always wanted to move faster, you know, across the centuries. Whether you're talking about someone like, I was reading about Veuve Clicquot, the widow, who completely transformed the champagne industry and, you know, did amazing things through revolution. And her words to her granddaughter on her deathbed were, "The world is in perpetual motion. We must invent the things of tomorrow, act with audacity." So there are certain people who will always want to go fast. But the truth is, the last 10 years, you know, we've seen a decade of disruption that's been driven by technology. You know, everybody's been talking about it, but coding on coding, platforms on platforms, ideas on ideas, until you've had the equivalent in business of compound interest, you know, everything going very, very fast. So that is definitely driving the perception of a need for speed.
That's a really good way of putting it, the compound interest, because it's exponential, isn't it? That's a really good analogy. So tell me, you mentioned Veuve Clicquot, one of my favourites. When you get to know me better, you'll know. Which companies, in your opinion, are moving fast, apart from Veuve Clicquot?
So it's interesting because actually there has been this fetishization of startups because, of course, they have been able to move really fast. When you don't have tech legacy or cultural legacy, you can move faster. But I do think the interesting ones now are the ones who are getting the pace right, which sometimes means being able to move fast and be responsive when they're a bigger organisation. So I spoke to quite a number of the super tankers, the big companies who are doing it. And I actually think Procter & Gamble and Unilever and Microsoft, the bigger companies who traditionally have been seen as slower, are learning that the ability to be both responsive when they need to and move fast, but also responsible is a real strength. So sometimes it's the least obvious companies. I spoke to some really interesting people as well. There's all kinds of people like HomeServe. It's one of my favourite companies in the UK at the moment, led by a guy called Greg Reed. And they are a really different organisation, but because they've got a great culture, which is really empowered, really clear, they've got a great sense of purpose, they are able to get the pace right as well.
I'm so glad you used that word pace, because you differentiate between being fast, speed, and pace. So talk to me about why pace is important.
I do think the best leaders understand the need for a variable pace. I mean, we just can't go super fast every second of the day. It's unsustainable and it's not smart. Because what you get is, and I've heard it in probably 30 different organizations and 50 different people in the last few years, people saying, I'm so busy, I've got this project, I've got my dad to look after, I've got this going on, everything's going on, I just don't have time to think. So the idea of pace includes varying it. Sports people do it. Pace setting sometimes means sprinting, sometimes means pausing, varying that pace. And when you plan projects or when you look at what's happening, understanding the need to be ready to go fast when you need to, because if your competition's doing something or someone's tweeted or a crisis hits, you do need to be able to respond fast, but also understanding how to build in time to think and time to manage energy and to vary the pace for people so that they can sustain it as well as enjoy it.
Fantastic. And tell me a little bit about the power of pause. I imagine that's about recovery, is it?
Yes, I think it's a very interesting word to use. At Caffeine, we tend to work with quite impatient leaders. And if you're speaking to somebody who has the ambition to make things happen, saying, oh, look, do you know what, I think this world is moving too fast and we should slow down, may not always work. But saying, build in the strategic pauses in your planning is a great way of thinking about it. And sometimes, yes, it's about energy, it's recharging, giving people a break so they can be more creative, they can be more positive about things. But often it's about planning that time to think. So if you plan a pause before a project, the pre-mortem, working out what you're going to do, what's going to go wrong, and that's really helpful. Plan a pause halfway through, because science seems to show that if you tell people they're halfway through, they always speed up. But also you can check you're on track. And then planning that pause after a project, so you get fast feedback, you constantly iterate and evolve. The idea of people who actually don't just rush headlong, busy fools, super fast, exhausting themselves, but can plan the pauses, that allows you to get things done today, but also make sure you can still deliver tomorrow.
I like that. I like that idea of planning a pause. I think that's really good. It's a very good bit of advice. And now, when I was younger, because I'm a very impatient person, which is why I relate to what you're saying here. And I used to say, God, give me patience, but give it to me now. It was my favorite saying, because I'm not patient at all. And my team will tell you I'm not a patient person, and I have to work on that sometimes. But you're saying actually impatience isn't a bad thing.
So I think there are, I think the really interesting and skillful people that I've spoken to and seen are ones who have a natural impatience to create, to get things done, to make things happen. So in the personality profiling side of things, they're drivers, but then the skillful ones, the 21st century leaders, are the ones who've learnt where patience helps. And I think there is this shift in leadership. We've gone from command and control and scream if you want to go faster and JFDI and making it happen, to understanding that actually if you want creativity and innovation and a positive working environment, giving people frameworks, and then the freedom. So you are still, giving them guidance. You're not letting everybody do whatever. You're giving them a sense of direction, and being patient about how much and how often you need to communicate to people. Because often, if you are an impatient person, you get an idea quickly, and you want to make it happen. But other people need to understand it with more rigor, or they need to work out how that applies to them. And so patience with people and impatience with wasting time. I mean, it is very frustrating when you see meetings that are badly planned, when you see the number of times that people talk about making a decision and don't actually make a decision. I think they're being impatient about, are we on track? But it all comes back down to, a sense of direction and purpose. Knowing what you ultimately want to achieve and having that sense of purpose allows you to work out, am I being impatient because we veered off track, and we're wasting time? Or am I being impatient just because I'm bad-tempered and probably exhausted? That's the other thing, managing your energy so you're not that you can be impatient to make things happen, but patient with people is probably the trick.
Yeah, I need to work on that. And the energy thing, you're absolutely right. And that the building pauses in your work week as well, so that you can recover. Absolutely. Speaking to the converted, I know I need to do that. So now, as part of your research for your book, Superfast, Lead at Speed, you spoke to 100 leaders. Did you find that there was a pattern in their behavior or mindset? Is there sort of like something that you thought you recognized in each of them?
It's an interesting question, because of course that's kind of what I was looking for. I wanted to find a shortcut. I wanted to find the recipe. But having spoken to such different, amazing people, I mean, it's great fun. But speaking to people who were leading very high growth startups, who are working in all the companies you'd expect, like Google, those people, I spoke to the head of the Joint Intelligence, the Counterterrorism Unit as well. So people who had really different challenges in different parts of the world, and they were all also different personalities, so introverts, extroverts, different ways of approaching it. And ultimately, 100 very successful people, and all they had in common really was that they were successful. So there isn't a recipe. You can't say, number one, this is what you have to do, number two. But they did all agree that we're in a position where there is this concept and perception of the need for speed, and navigating that for yourself personally is really, really important, as well as for your teams. So structuring to help others have speed and managing your own pace, they'd all learnt that and understood that. And actually, do you know what? They were all the kind of generous, thoughtful people who wanted to share the mistakes they'd made, what they'd learnt, and communicate that with others.
That's amazing. So I was hoping for a recipe, but okay. We haven't got one, because I want a shortcut, you know me.
And there are some, because learning from other people is a really, Eleanor Roosevelt, who's the most famous for being the wife of an American president, but was an amazing woman in her own right, because she founded, United Nations Human Rights Convention and everything. She always said, we must learn from other people's mistakes, because life is too short to make them all ourselves. So there are things you can learn from what other people have done. Of course, they get you thinking, but it's so personal. What energizes you versus what energizes me, how we react to people. So that bit of understanding yourself, I think, is probably the only thing in the recipe that I would say is essential. Human understanding about yourself, and starting with that.
And that's a really good piece of advice, So you're also an advocate of flexible work, and you've developed something called Flexi. Can you tell me a little bit more about how that works, and if you think that the future of work is about being more flexible?
It's a fascinating topic, and it's a complicated topic. So the reason Flexi was a terrible name, it was a joke, and it stuck in a business that I ran a few years ago. And that was a business that was run completely with a distributed workforce, an amazing, amazing team who were scattered across the world. And for a period of time, I ran the business from Estonia as well. even though it's a UK-based business. So we really learnt how to build up a system that worked for all the people involved and for our customers, which was the priority, and it worked incredibly well. But you do have to overcompensate if you are all working remotely, and you do have to also understand that it can be incredibly beneficial. So we called it Sexy Flexi just as a joke one day, but actually everybody involved was really positive about the experience. They all had complete time sovereignty. So it didn't matter when they were working, as long as they were able to get what was done, the results only work environment. They worked together as a team to make sure there was customer service cover, that came first. They were always prepared to be flexible, and we were always prepared to be flexible with them about how it worked. So of course, that was a particular small example, and one story does not make a full this is what it should be like. But I've since gone on and worked with a number of different organisations, and the Caffeine Partnership is also a cloud-based consultancy. And I've discovered how it can work. You do need to over-communicate. You do need to find ways to create different serendipity and different connections around it. But it's entirely possible. And it does give people the chance to have energy, for you to attract the most amazing talent. I mean, that's absolutely one of the ways of doing it. People were, every time we advertised in my previous business for a role, we got hundreds of thousands of responses because it was entirely flexible. So I think we can see that the world is shifting towards hybrid models and a greater way of working. It's good for the environment. It gives more flexibility to people. But there is no substitute for building relationships, and finding ways to do that in person or over technology is the real challenge.
So that's fantastic. I've got a couple of comments for you. You might not be aware that London Speaker Bureau has been virtual for 17 years. And my team are all virtual. So we're scattered across 18 countries. And for us, it's worked. And you're right, you do need to over-communicate. But I also think it does help the speed element, because you can react to things immediately if you need to, and if you are flexible enough to do that. So that actually works really well. So I think that the flexible aspect could be helpful to speed as well, from what you're saying.
Yes, and if you've got motivated people, engaged people, that's also important as well. So it starts with, it's a classic case, I think, of where you slow down to plan and think at the start, to make sure you've got the system set up, to make sure people understand what's expected of them, and they've got those frameworks so that they don't feel isolated. But with a little thought, as you've absolutely proved, it allows people to be able to respond fast and to have great autonomy, which is very motivating for people.
It also actually means that people stay with you longer. We have a very low churn level of staff, very low, people, they don't leave, because it means that they can fit the work in with their lives. So talking about speed, talking about flexibility, you mentioned your customers when you were talking about being flexible. How does the customer fit in when a company is going faster and faster and faster? And we mustn't forget the customer, obviously.
No, but I think what's interesting is most of the companies who are moving fast are inherently customer-centric organisations. So the king of speed himself, Jeff Bezos, and what he's done with Amazon, whatever you think of Amazon, it has always been a real focus with the customer as a chair in the boardroom, and understanding how not to ask customers what you want, but to be able to anticipate them. And I've seen, having worked in organisations looking at brand and customer experience across the years, those who are close to their customer, have the ability to be able to anticipate what they'll need. They don't need to necessarily go out and ask, but they understand them, they have that empathy, which allows them to make decisions fast. It's no coincidence, actually, that quite a lot of fast growth entrepreneurial stories, the founder was somebody who was actually a customer, because they're able to make high velocity decisions, making them at speed and in the right direction, because they have a sense and an understanding of what the customer needs.
Absolutely right. They totally understand. So tell me, when clients are asking you to come and speak for them at their events, what are they saying? Talk to us about speed, talk to us about leading. What is it that they're asking you to talk about?
Just a few different areas that people seem particularly interested in. There is this shift, the 21st century leadership shift that has come with a change in the way the world works at speed. So Matt Britton, who's the Google EMEA president, wrote for me a quote about Superfast, which I think sums it up, where he talks about the fact that the way the world has changed and we need to move faster means the way in which we lead has also changed. So a lot of people are interested in, what is this change from accuracy to ambiguity, from machines in an organization to a bit more of a movement, and what does that mean for me as a leader? So there's a leadership area, and sometimes we're talking to very senior leadership teams about how they are personally dealing with that. For other people, it is this question of pace. So, there are understandably a lot of people who want their organisations to really get a sense of the urgency of business, and to be thinking themselves about how they can iterate and evolve and change what's going on. Because if you can get everybody inside the organisation as the deciders as well as being the doers, they can help improve everything and speed everything up. So sometimes people want me to talk about the need for pace, but never in a way that, I think occasionally you get people, I think you sit in the audience going, oh, she's going to come in and tell me I've got to work harder, we've got to do more. And of course, that's the beauty of understanding the different ways of working. It is not about working longer hours, working harder, trying to do more, but often it's about understanding how you edit your choices, how you prioritize, and different ways of working. So leadership, understanding the world in which we work and pace, and moving beyond that it's disrupting, but what do we actually do about it? And very often there is a practical need for people to have somebody who can help actually give some energy to people in the room about this, and some optimism, to not just feel it's overwhelming and there's too much and I'm exhausted, but to give them some tools and techniques and ideas to help them think about how they can take ownership and lead themselves.
Thank you. And so finally, what one thing could our listeners do today to help them accelerate their own success?
I would probably say that nurturing your curiosity is essential right now. Because the world is moving so fast, we cannot possibly know everything. As Satya Nadella from Microsoft says, we shouldn't be know-it-alls, we should be learn-it-alls. And right now, there are ways of accessing insights and ideas through things like your podcast, through reading, through understanding what else is out there, which should help stimulate your thinking and help you have that sort of peripheral vision. So you're looking up and around, not just looking down and hoping that your spreadsheet is magically going to get bigger and better. So I would say stay curious, and every single day work out what more can I learn, how can I think, how can I unlearn. As a lot of my interviewees had understood at a very senior level, that we need to keep unlearning and stay curious.
Brilliant, thank you.
Thank you very much. It's been really good talking.